Now, shall we begin?
Of all the villains the X-Men have encountered, Danger is perhaps the most ironic. Unlike the others, she was created to help train the X-Men, and when she turned on them, Danger became so dangerous that Steve Rogers himself goes on to describe it as an extinction-level threat. I really enjoyed the comic book run Astonishing X-Men, which first introduced Danger as a villain, and now X-Men 97 has brought back this underrated foe in the latest episode titled Danger.Exe. But there's more to the threat of Danger than just a generic story about AI going rogue and trying to kill its creator. In fact, the comic book narrative is far more complicated than what we see in the animated series, and even though we've seen Danger seemingly destroyed in that episode, that's simpler said than done. I thought this would be a good time to take a look at the entire life and physiological features of Danger, which makes her such a dreaded opponent, and this video should have all the answers that you're looking for. It's going to be a good one, so let's get right into it.
Hello, Professor. Initializing Danger Room Protocol.
What exactly is the Danger Room, and how does it work? To put it simply, the Danger Room is nothing more than a training facility for the X-Men. It was created by Professor Xavier after he decided to set up his school for gifted youngsters with the goal of training young mutants to use their powers ethically. The Danger Room was just another tool to strengthen his philosophy of human-mutant coexistence, and in the early days, it was located in the off-limits west wing of the mansion. Also, the high-tech fancy Danger Room of the modern era isn't the same one we got in the beginning. It started off with simple traps, projectile-firing devices, and other mechanical dangers like collapsing walls and presses that would test the trainee and help them train for crisis situations. The rules were pretty basic. When someone was training in the Danger Room, someone else would be at the control booth, making sure that the room's mechanisms were managed safely without any real danger to the trainee. The Danger Room's been there since the beginning, appearing in 1963's X-Men #1, although it wasn't called the Danger Room until X-Men #2. But, like I mentioned, it was pretty much just an enhanced obstacle course at that point. As you can see, the Danger Room was mostly just a harmless tool, and it served the X-Men for years, even though there were some troubling signs, such as the fact that it could always be used against them. In X-Men Volume 1, number 110, from 1978, Warhawk took control of the Danger Room and locked the X-Men inside while removing all the fail-safes. This was one of the earliest instances of the Danger Room actually backfiring on the X-Men, but nothing compares to the Danger Room's most iconic arc when it gained sentience as an individual entity named Danger, which came many years later during the early 2000s. What's the architecture behind the Danger Room? If you're familiar with comic books, you know this isn't an easy answer. The stories keep changing, and so do the origins, and for this reason, it's difficult to determine a fixed architectural pattern for the Danger Room. The Xavier Mansion has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times, and every time, the location and physical size of the Danger Room changes. Even the control room and the obstacle course itself has undergone changes accordingly. Sometimes the room is portrayed as rectangular, and others it's depicted as a large sphere or a domed space. Sometimes the Danger Room's not even in the mansion at all because the X-Men have set up shop in San Francisco, Australia, Krakoa, or any other number of places. But one thing's for sure, if the X-Men are training, it's probably in a version of the Danger Room.
Behind me! Stay alert!
How did the Danger Room function, and what were the safety features? The purpose of the Danger Room was to make the X-Men better warriors, and for that, the control station provided them with a lot of neat tricks. For instance, the scenario could be selected as required, and even the difficulty level could be adjusted. You could pick out the number and type of enemies, as well as suitable environmental conditions for the training. Also, there was an elaborate safety feature to make sure that the training never endangered the participant. The emergency shutdown could be implemented at any point, and usually, the person sitting in the control room would oversee everything and shut it down if the trainee was in any real danger. Moreover, the Danger Room could help the X-Men in processing the data from their training regime to help them understand their shortcomings and strengths better. It was the perfect tool for tactical analysis, and it worked wonders in making the X-Men function more efficiently as a team, but there was one issue with the Danger Room that just kept popping up. As efficient as those safety features were, someone could always tamper with them and endanger the person training. Sometimes it was caused by tense infighting among the X-Men, where someone in the control room would ignore the danger faced by a trainee, or sometimes it was an antagonist who would use the control room as a tool against the X-Men. I mean, from a narrative standpoint, it's pure gold. Imagine the X-Men trapped inside a facility that's literally designed around their weaknesses. These situations weren't exactly uncommon, even before the Danger Room mutated into the villain Danger, which didn't happen until the Astonishing X-Men story arc. The upgrade of the Danger Room. As much as the upgrades made to the Danger Room made the training process a lot more efficient and advanced, it was also the root cause behind the eventual threat posed by the robotic entity known as Danger when it gained sentience. However, it started off rather harmlessly as Professor Xavier chose to upgrade the Danger Room with advanced holographic technology and a tactical computer matrix. This took place around the launch of New Mutants number 1 in 1983, and after befriending the Shi'ar Empire, Xavier decided to put their futuristic technology to good use. With Shi'ar tech, the Danger Room could create immersive and interactive artificial environments, and it could better simulate a variety of situations the X-Men could potentially encounter in the field. It was a big upgrade. The Danger Room went from mechanical traps and obstacles to realistic holographic versions of their most deadly foes. However, the Danger Room's prime directive remained the same. It was forbidden from killing the X-Men under any circumstances. This new tech also meant that the Danger Room could give the illusion of being many times larger than it actually was. Parameters for things like gravity, heat, humidity, and even texture could be manipulated from the control booth now. The first ones to try out this upgraded Danger Room were the New Mutants. In fact, the technology behind the Danger Room was now so strong that it could even access other dimensions by using the Dark Force. But behind all these fancy technological advancements, a real threat lay dormant, and it eventually manifested when the Danger Room gained sentience.
We evolve, engineered for survival.
When did the Danger Room gain sentience, and how was it handled? Now we're entering the Astonishing X-Men arc by the controversial Joss Whedon, and say what you want about the man, he knows how to write a comic book. As Xavier was working to further upgrade the Danger Room, one night the room spoke to him and asked, "Where am I?" This takes place around issues 10 through 12 of Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, and Xavier realizes that the Danger Room has gained sentience and come to life. However, he also knew that it was extremely important to have the Danger Room for training purposes, and he chose to simply hide the news from everyone else. Now, I know what you're thinking. Forcibly keeping a sentient tool and making it work for him sounds an awful lot like enslavement, but you have to remember here that the Astonishing X-Men didn't care much to paint Professor X as a saint. He was flawed, just like everyone else, and this is a rather questionable decision that eventually jeopardized the safety of his entire team. Also, it's easy to forget that one time, Colossus was controlled by the Shadow King, and Professor X had to lock him inside the Danger Room. He trashed the room completely in Uncanny X-Men 279, but Professor X got forged to rebuild the whole thing, and the Danger Room was further upgraded at this point. Also, the location of the room was changed, and it was moved to the west wing of the mansion's sub-basement, taking the humanoid form of Danger. I think Whedon's Astonishing X-Men gives the Danger Room its most interesting spin ever when it eventually takes on a humanoid form known as Danger. By now, Professor Xavier already knows that the Danger Room has gained sentience, but he chose to ignore it. When Quan Yin impersonated Magneto, the mansion was destroyed, and later Beast had to rebuild the sub-basement. Of course, he had no idea about the sentient life within the Danger Room, but it had already started controlling other machines to give itself a physical body. Then comes the most disturbing part of the story, and you could say that this is the point where Danger loses its grip over its ethical code, which governs its X-Men training. It sent an Omega Sentinel to fight the X-Men, and in the meantime, the Danger Room convinced a student named Wing to commit suicide. As I said earlier, this goes against a fundamental prime directive where nobody training there could be harmed in real life. The Danger Room also took on a physical form, a robotic one that looked like a humanoid female, and it called itself Danger. Danger went completely rogue and locked the students in a horrible simulation. Danger was consumed with human emotions like anger and rejection, and her grudges were mostly directed towards her supposed father figure, Professor X. She flew a blackbird to Genosha to settle the score with her creator, but the professor destroyed her. However, killing something that's essentially just a consciousness isn't easy, and Danger took over another Omega Sentinel, that had previously massacred the mutants of Genosha. It was Kitty Pryde who convinced Danger to examine the memory of its orders, and Danger was left in shock by the magnitude of this crime. In the comics, it's Beast who destroys Danger's original female humanoid body, but this was far from the end of her. Her consciousness remained within the Sentinel, and she regained her humanoid form when she infiltrated the headquarters of SWORD and allied with Ord of the Break World in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, number 17. The redemption arc of Danger. This happens pretty much right after Danger's attempt to enter an alliance with Ord. Emma Frost approaches the robot and offers to let her face Professor X again. In return, she had to help the X-Men, and this showed that her core programming of working with mutants remained intact. This deal brought her back to the X-Men as an ally, but even afterwards, her relationship with Xavier remained tense. Danger served as the warden of the X-Men's San Francisco base, Utopia, and she was able to observe more of human behavior, which strengthened her cooperation because of her curiosity about the species. Later, in a story arc from All New X-Factor in 2014, Danger was freed by Gambit, and she was invited to join the team as an integral part of the mutants. Some even argued that she was technically a mutant because she had evolved from the Shi'ar's advanced technology. However, she was still rejected from Krakoa after the X-Men established their base on the island nation. Krakoa had strict laws against artificial intelligence, and Danger simply couldn't be admitted. She moved back into the abandoned X-Mansion and created robotic versions of the X-Men, even though she had a strong grudge against those who rejected her. She also worked with the CIA, and her skill set came in very handy for their missions. The aftermath of the Danger Room. Once the threat was dealt with, the Danger Room was gone as well, and the X-Men used the empty room for training purposes as it helped the students in Xavier's mutant school. Eventually, a mutant student named Prodigy built the Danger Cave, which was essentially similar to the original Danger Room, but it was built underneath the X-Mansion. However, I think the most intriguing aspect of the Danger Room is how it eventually turned on its creators, and the later stories don't cover that. This made that X-Men 97 episode all the more special, even though there were some significant changes made to the story. How X-Men 97 handles Danger. Danger.Exe is an episode that takes the best bits of the comics and ignores some of the details and less obscure parts. I mean, it's hard to blame the showrunners for skipping details, given that they only have about 30 minutes to go through such a dense narrative. Here, Danger is shown to emerge as a result of the trauma, tragedy, and insecurities of Professor Xavier. After the loss of Magneto, who was killed by Apocalypse, Xavier struggles to cope with the fact that he was absolutely helpless when it all happened. He went through the simulation multiple times, but it didn't help his mental condition, and moreover, the final attempt almost had Apocalypse crush him for real in the simulation. Xavier gave the Danger Room a stern warning about that behavior, and in the robotic mind, some sentience was forming that interpreted it differently. This twisted sentience soon turned against its creator and the X-Men, but we don't get the details of how Danger gains a physical body in this episode. Also, a significant change here is that Professor X wasn't aware of her sentience, and while that change is probably due to pacing, it's also indicative of how much more noble the show version of Xavier is compared to his counterpart in Astonishing X-Men. Danger takes her attack to Genosha, but unlike the comics, the real hero here turns out to be Polaris, who proves to be a worthy daughter of Magneto. The other X-Men are virtually clueless when they fight Danger, as she overpowers them all rather easily because her database is full of information about their fighting styles and thought processes. She can predict their every move, and the likes of Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Beast fail miserably to stop her. When she's about to crush Professor X, though, Polaris steps into the line of fire and unleashes a powerful enough electromagnetic blast to destroy Danger. In the comics, this destruction was far from permanent, but this might be the last we see of her in the show. But setting aside all the differences, I really love Danger's comic-accurate portrayal in this episode. Is Danger female? Danger appears in a female humanoid form, and she refers to herself with female pronouns, but at the end of the day, she's an AI that built a robotic body for herself. She merely designed herself to look like a human female. Her physical form has no relation to a human body other than looking like one, so she might look like a woman, but because she's not human, it becomes a bit of a gray area. Danger serves as a metaphor for mutant crisis. Have you ever considered how similar Danger's plight is compared to that of the mutants? The X-Men universe has always established mutants as marginalized and misunderstood people in society. Is Danger really any different? Setting aside her violent acts for a second, her story has a rather sympathetic twist. She gained sentience not because of free will, but because of circumstances, and she's no more than a victim of those circumstances. In the comics, it's Xavier who ignored her sentience, which kinda set her off, but the show version doesn't have any such role for the X-Men. If we consider the comics, she develops a conscience and a form that the others fail to recognize, and she's feared for who she's become. That's almost the exact crisis that the mutants are faced with, right? Plus, a lot of her violent outbursts can actually be linked to her tragic origin story, and the fact that the show ignores this makes her a very clear antagonist. What makes Danger so powerful and invincible? As we mentioned, Danger is more than a powerful AI developing sentience. She's got a personality, which is a mix of all the strongest X-Men she's helped to train over the years. The advanced Shi'ar technology upgraded Danger significantly, and she became one of the most formidable antagonists the X-Men have ever encountered. Perhaps her most dangerous ability is her encyclopedic knowledge of the X-Men. Having helped them train for so long, she knows all their strengths and weaknesses. She knows their fighting moves and styles inside out, so it's easy for her to predict their next attacks and act accordingly. We got to see some of that in X-Men 97, when heavy hitters like Cyclops and Jean Grey are rendered useless because of how Danger deals with their attacks. Aside from that, it's very difficult to permanently destroy something that isn't technically alive in the human sense of the term. All she needs to do is transfer her consciousness somewhere after her physical form is destroyed, and she continues to remain in action. We've seen her take over Sentinel bodies in the comics, and she's capable of developing a humanoid robotic physique as well, which means that a defeat for her is only temporary. As a sentient program, Danger has the ability to command smart devices in her vicinity, and she can transfer her digital consciousness into other machinery in case her physical body is damaged. Danger is a master of illusions. This ability is courtesy of the Shi'ar hologram technology that Xavier used to enhance her. Danger can process holographic projections, and she can create objects and detailed environments to torment individuals. She emits hard light constructs, and she can use these to appear human or create an illusion over a large area. These aren't your regular holograms, they have physical substance that can be rearranged at will. Her intelligence is superhuman, and she knows about the deepest insecurities of every X-Men and uses it against them. There was a nice touch in X-Men 97 where Danger triggered Polaris by tormenting her about her troubled relationship with her father, Magneto. Danger is a master of illusions, and her random environments and holographic images can disorient her enemies. How strong is Danger's physical form? As if it wasn't enough that she can predict the X-Men's moves and fight back using their weaknesses, Danger also happens to be freakishly strong in her humanoid physical form. Her robotic body possesses great physical strength, and at her peak operating capacity, she's strong enough to take on someone like Beast. Moreover, this humanoid figure is ultra-sophisticated, and she has advanced hydraulics instead of organic muscle tissue. This makes her tireless, and she is able to push herself at peak capacity indefinitely. Her body is made of high-impact and high-grade titanium and steel alloy, which makes her powerful enough to withstand energy blasts or falls from great heights. One of her coolest abilities is technoforming, where she can command any mechanically functional apparatus around her and is able to recreate her body from the materials around her almost instantly.
Strength.
What is a weakness in Danger that can be exploited? Danger does have a few chinks in her armor, especially if we're going by the comic book version. Her core programming forbids her from killing any of the X-Men, and even though she tries, it's a major override that the systems probably can't process. That said, she's defied this directive a number of times and once even provoked a student into suicide, if that counts, but the show version completely ignores this handicap, which of course only makes her deadlier. Danger in the animated universe. The Danger Room was featured often in the animated universe, and the Marvel universe has never shied away from the importance of the Danger Room in the training process. One of the first instances that I remember of the Danger Room being turned into a serious threat was from Spider-Man and his amazing friends in the episode titled The X-Men Adventure. Here, Spider-Man, Iceman, and Firestorm visit the X-Men at their mansion, and they get trapped inside the Danger Room, which was referred to as the Maze of Madness. They had to work together to survive the security threats, and it was a great example of how unregulated use of the Danger Room could be extremely dangerous. Another episode that really explains the function and purpose of the Danger Room is The Night of the Sentinels Part 1, where Jubilee enters the Danger Room as Gambit and Wolverine are fighting, and Beast explains the facility and its purpose. For anyone who was unfamiliar with the concept of the Danger Room, this was a great introduction to it right at the very beginning of X-Men the Animated Series. Additionally, in the episode Captive Hearts, the X-Men undergo a training scenario involving closed walls and other threats in confined spaces. This exposes Storm's claustrophobia. It's a grim reminder of how the Danger Room has an extensive database that stores the weakness of every X-Men who trains there. Another classic example of the Danger Room being misused comes in the episode Till Death Do Us Part, where Morph interferes with a Danger Room session involving Beast and Wolverine fighting a simulated Cyclops. This episode showed us that the Danger Room could be a terrible weapon if suppressed resentment was allowed to play out during the training scenarios. Looking at episodes like this, it's easy to understand where the idea of framing Danger as an independent villain eventually came from. If you want an episode that portrays the Danger Room as an outright threat, I'd recommend Strategy X, the season opener for X-Men Evolution. Nightcrawler and Toad find out that the Danger Room can be a serious threat as they get attacked by the automated systems. This version of the Danger Room is more of a technologically advanced chamber, and it becomes very clear how hazardous it is without any proper supervision. On the other hand, if you want to see the Danger Room being used smartly, then check out the episode of X-Men Evolution titled Survival of the Fittest. Here, Professor X uses it strategically to confront the Juggernaut. The dangers of the facility are also highlighted in the episode Fun and Games, where Weber treats the Danger Room like a video game and gets into some real trouble. You realize that the real threat of the Danger Room is that it's capable of inflicting life-threatening situations, even though the initial appearance and functionality make it seem like it's easy and fun to use. I've always thought that Danger is an underrated villain because the X-Men universe hasn't used her enough. She's a blessing and a curse all at once, and given the nature of her sentience and her unpredictability, she can be a constant threat to the X-Men. It was great to see her pop up in the recent episode of X-Men 97, and I'd say that the makers did a fine job in capturing her true essence in such a short runtime. That said, I'd love to hear your take on the character and her representation in the new episode. Let me know in the comments down below where you want to see Danger pop up next, and also, if you appreciate our efforts in bringing you this content, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons, because not only will you get to see more videos like this, you'll also be helping us make them. That's a win-win, baby, and it's more than you'll ever get from the Danger Room.